My name is Malcolm Rhodes, and I've spent most of my life showing up, first at my children's school recitals, then at soccer practice under rain-soaked skies, later at graduations and parent-teacher conferences. I showed up for my ex-wife, Simone, when she needed a ride to doctor's appointments, when she asked for help moving furniture, even when she called in the middle of the night, tears in her voice, telling me she'd forgotten her keys again. And I showed up for the version of myself I thought I had to be: steady, dependable, silently proud. So when Braden, my oldest, called one afternoon and asked me to come to his wedding, I felt a rush of joy until his next words landed like stones in a pond. "Of course I want you there, Dad," he said, voice steady but with an edge I'd felt only twice before, once when he was angry at 14, and once when he was furious at 18. "But would you mind sitting at a separate table? Just for the ceremony, so my stepdad can, kind of have the spotlight." I swallowed and said yes. I didn't argue. I didn't hesitate. I heard the click of the phone as he hung up, and I put it down gently, as though it might crack under the weight of what had just happened. I didn't cry. I didn't slam my fist on the table. I just sat there in my kitchen, hands flat on the cold surface, staring down at the wood grain. My heart felt hollow, as though someone had scooped out the best part of me and left an echo behind. In that silence, I remembered every time I'd been relegated to the backseat of my own life. The countless birthdays I spent in the shadows while Simone and Lyle took the center stage. The holidays when I washed dishes alone in the sink while everyone else laughed in the living room. I remembered the force of habit that made me accept every exclusion with a polite nod and a forced smile. But today, something broke. It wasn't anger that pushed me to my feet. It was a quiet refusal to shrink any further. I went to my laptop, hands trembling as I opened the travel site I'd visited once before on a whim. Moments later, I had booked a week at a small cabin by a lake in the Adirondacks. I clicked RSVP no on the wedding website, and then I closed my laptop without telling anyone. No Simone, no Braden, not even Lyle, the man who'd once stood on my porch calling me a failure in front of my kids. This trip, this one thing, would be mine alone. No spotlight, no stage directions, just me and the honest daylight. By the time I arrived at the cabin, the world felt different. The wooden walls smelled of pine and old pages, the creaky floorboards serving as a welcome reminder that nothing here expected perfection. I unpacked methodically, folded my shirts, placed my worn-out shoes by the door, and set my old journals on the corner of the table. Then I stepped onto the porch and watched the lake shimmer under the mid-afternoon sun. It looked like something out of a postcard, still, wide, and indifferent to my hurts. I closed my eyes and breathed in the scent of cedar, feeling the weight on my shoulders begin to lift. That first evening, I let myself imagine Braden's wedding without guilt. I pictured Simone in a silk dress, glowing beneath the chandeliers. I saw Lyle raising his glass, telling stories about how he'd changed my son's life. I saw the chair hidden in the back corner, half empty, meant for me, an afterthought. But then I imagined myself in that chair no more. I saw instead a sturdy wooden chair I would build, simple, unadorned, crafted with my own hands. In my mind, I wrote a note I would never send. "I hope your wedding was beautiful, but I will not be your prop. I will not be your ghost." The next morning, I wandered into the shed at the edge of the property and found an old toolbox. I dusted off a hand saw and a hammer, then returned to the porch where a stack of leftover pine boards leaned against the wall. I measured, cut, and sanded, the rhythm of each stroke reconnecting me to who I really was. My hands remembered how to work, how to build and repair. As I hammered the last nail into place, I admired the chair taking shape. Sturdy legs, a comfortable back, a seat wide enough to hold my confidence. On the third day, I listened to my phone light up with messages I chose not to open. Simone left a voicemail that whispered apology but asked for my presence. Braden texted, "I noticed your RSVP, hope everything's okay." Each ping felt like an intrusion, like someone demanding I return to the script I'd long ago outgrown. I didn't respond. I set the phone aside and took a deep breath, cutting another board for the armrest of the chair. By the fourth morning, the chair stood finished beside me, its rough edges softened by my sanding, its surface gleaming with the promise of something earned. I carried it down to the water's edge, placed it on the dock, and sat. The lake stretched out before me, reflecting clouds shaped like memories and possibilities. I let the quiet speak, letting it fill the space where the old version of myself had once lived. I didn't need their fake toasts or curated photos. I had my hands, my peace, in the chair I had built, each nail a testament to self-respect. In that moment, I understood that showing up for myself was not selfish. It was necessary. And as the sun began to set, painting the sky in shades of promise, I knew that no matter what happened back home, I would never again ask permission to take up space in my own story. After hanging up, I just sat there, hands flat on the kitchen table, not moving, not breathing deeply, just still. The silence in the room grew so thick I could hear the humming from the refrigerator like it was screaming. I stared at the phone like it might light up again and say something different, something softer, something that didn't sting so much. But it didn't. It just sat there too, cold, lifeless, as if it hadn't just delivered a quiet fracture down the middle of my chest. I didn't cry. That would have felt too generous toward the people who had made this choice seem normal. I didn't scream either. I've never been the kind to raise my voice unless it was at a basketball game or singing along to some classic rock while driving with the windows down. No, I just stood up, slow and deliberate, like my bones needed permission. I walked to the sink, poured out the coffee I hadn't touched, and rinsed the mug like it was a habit I had to perform in order to stay upright. Then I walked over to my laptop, opened it, and typed in lakefront cabins near me. Not near the city. Not near them. Somewhere quiet. Isolated. Real. I found a listing tucked into the edge of the Adirondacks. A single-room cabin beside a still lake. Old wood siding. A small fireplace. No TV. Barely any cell service. It called to something in me I hadn't listened to in a long time. Maybe ever. I booked it for 7 nights. No hesitation. No second-guessing. I clicked RSVP on the wedding website. Selected no, didn't leave a note. Didn't text Braden. Didn't explain anything to Simone. And definitely didn't offer any courtesy message to Lyle, the man who once screamed in my driveway, "You'll never be enough for them," while my children listened through the blinds. He'd have the spotlight, Braden said. Let him have it. He always wanted to play the hero. Let him have the crowd. Let him pretend he raised my son. This trip was mine. This silence mine. This choice, finally mine. I packed lightly. A duffel bag of clothes. 2 flannel shirts, jeans, a hoodie that still smelled faintly of pine from the last camping trip I took years ago. A couple of paperbacks. My old Moleskine journal. A flask I hadn't used in a while, but brought anyway. I didn't need much. Just space. Just somewhere to remember who I was before I let everyone else decide it for me. The drive took almost 8 hours, winding through stretches of road that narrowed and thinned until even the traffic noise gave up. The sky turned from pale blue to soft gray, clouds stretching wide like a promise of solitude. I rolled down the windows and let the cool air hit my face. It felt like being scrubbed clean from the outside in. When I reached the cabin, I stopped the car and just stared at it for a moment. It wasn't fancy. The porch sagged a little. The steps creaked. The siding had surrendered its stain to time. But it was perfect in the way things are when they make no apologies for existing. I carried my bag inside. The floorboards groaned beneath my steps like they were waking from sleep. The walls were bare except for a few nails left behind by someone who once hung their memories here. A small wood-burning stove sat in the corner, surrounded by a few chopped logs stacked neatly like they'd been waiting just for me. I unpacked slowly, deliberately, folded my clothes into the empty dresser, set the books on the table by the window, placed my journal on the nightstand beside the old brass lamp. There was something sacred about it all, something intentional, like I was building an altar to my own stillness. Then I stepped out onto the porch and sat on the one chair that had been left there, weathered, a bit wobbly, but it held. The lake stretched before me, quiet and expansive, like it didn't care about weddings or seating charts or second husbands in tailored suits. It didn't ask me to step aside. It didn't try to perform. It just was. And in its reflection, for the first time in a long while, so was I. As the light faded, I didn't turn on any lamps. I let the dusk wrap around me like a blanket. The quiet wasn't heavy, it was liberating. I wasn't trying to read into messages or decode cold texts or soften the edge of someone else's indifference. I wasn't trying to shrink myself into someone's, just for the ceremony request. I was here, alone, and it didn't feel like loneliness. It felt like restoration. I sat there until the stars began to emerge. The sky, dark and vast, held each one like a secret, blinking gently as if to say, "You're not forgotten." I remembered how Braden used to point them out when he was a child, when he used to sit on my shoulders and shout, "That one's mine." I don't know when I stopped being the man whose shoulders held up the sky for him. Maybe the truth is, I didn't stop. Maybe he just stopped looking up. I reached into my duffel, pulled out my journal, and scribbled a line across the first page. I don't need a spotlight. I just need a sky that doesn't ask me to dim. Then I closed the cover and sat still again. Tomorrow, I'd start fresh. Maybe build something with my hands. Maybe just breathe. But tonight, this silence was my RSVP. My answer to the question no one thought to ask me. Do you want to be seen? Yes, but not at a separate table. Not on someone else's terms. Not ever again. Let me tell you something about Simone and Lyle. They belong together, two-faced liars in matching smiles, playing roles on a stage they built for themselves. Simone with her rehearsed warmth, the way she greets everyone as if they are long-lost friends, head tilting just so, eyes sparkling with manufactured concern. And Lyle, with his polished charm and disarming compliments, the perfect veneer of a stepfather who arrived on the scene promising stability and love. They are a pair of actors who learned their craft from the same school, and Braden, eager to please and desperate for approval, soaked up their lessons as if they were gospel. He always wanted control of narratives, of perceptions, even of the smallest details of his own life. He learned that from Simone, who orchestrated her own self-presentation like a director staging every scene. He learned it from Lyle, who masked ambition with paternal tenderness, who could pivot in an instant from doting to domineering, and everyone would nod and applaud. It made sense, then, in his mind, to sideline me. I wasn't pliable. I wasn't fake. I didn't know my lines or pretend to be the man they wanted in the family portrait. I didn't offer a slideshow-worthy backstory of how I'd sacrificed everything for their comfort. I just existed, genuine and unvarnished. That lack of polish was my undoing. They feared upsetting Braden, feared losing his loyalty, so they folded me neatly into the category of the past, a placeholder at best and a threat at worst. By relegating me to a separate table at his wedding, they were saying, loud and clear, you were here, but we don't need you to prop up the image we're selling. I can live with that. I've always believed that authenticity matters more than perfection. So being left out of their orchestrated spectacle felt less like a wound and more like a release. When Simone first walked away from me, she took the house, the car, the first half of our lives. When she remarried, she took my name and replaced it with a new one. But she couldn't take away the memories that live in my bones, the moments when Braden fell asleep on my shoulder, or when Ava learned to ride her bike and I held onto her until she found her balance. I saw Kellen's shy grin the morning of his first day of college, and Suri's triumphant cheer when she hit the winning goal in her soccer match. Those are the truths that matter. I'd take those 75% moments of real love over a perfect 100% lie any day. The day after I booked the cabin, I stopped by the house to pick up a few things. In the garage, I dug through boxes until I found a framed photo of the five of us on a summer afternoon. Simone in a sundress, Braden in a faded baseball cap, and the three younger kids lined up in front of me, arms linked, grinning at the camera. I carried it gently, almost afraid it would shatter the second I touched it. Inside, the farmhouse kitchen smelled like cinnamon and yesterday's coffee. I grabbed my favorite coffee mug, the one chipped at the rim where I washed it one too many times, and a battered leather-bound journal where I wrote my thoughts. I didn't stop by Simone's room or knock on her door. I didn't want to see the life I used to have sitting under new ownership. I left quietly, stepping back into the crisp morning air and closing the door behind me. Driving to the cabin, I thought about the lives they lead now. The meticulously curated social media posts, the congratulatory speeches they will deliver on wedding day, the whispered rumors of how I'd been difficult, how I'd been too old-fashioned, too rigid, too unwilling to adapt. I wondered if Braden had rehearsed what he'd say when someone asked why I wasn't at their table. Maybe he'd blame a plane delay or a last-minute work commitment. Maybe he'd just shrug and change the subject. His stepdad would lean in, pat his shoulder, and say, "They'll understand eventually," as though my absence were an inconvenience, not a choice. When I arrived at the cabin, I carried the photo inside and placed it on the nightstand beside the journal. I sat on the edge of the bed, looking at our faces, filtered through nostalgia, but still authentic. I thought about what real permanence means. Not a staged ceremony, but the memory of dipping my hand into a bowl of dough and watching Ava's eyes light up as she rolled out cookies. Not a scripted toast, but Kellen's hug when I told him I was proud of him for finding his own path. Not a spotlight, but late-night conversations with Suri, when she told me her dreams of painting houses and starting murals in underserved neighborhoods. Those moments built the foundation of my life, not any ceremony or table assignment. That evening, I built a small fire in the wood stove. The crackle of the flames filled the cabin with a comforting rhythm. I poured a whiskey into the chipped mug and sat by the window, watching the trees sway in the breeze. The lake was a mirror, reflecting the fading light of dusk, unbothered by expectations or seating charts. I opened my journal and wrote. They sidelined me so they could shine. But my love isn't staged, and my presence isn't a prop. I am neither invisible nor forgotten. The words felt powerful as I penned them, each letter a testament to my resolve. By nightfall, the stars hung low and bright, as if daring me to look away. I lay on the porch, back against the wood of the cabin, and let the Milky Way spill overhead. I thought of how they would be gathered under chandeliers the next day, how laughter would echo in halls I wasn't invited to enter. But here, in the quiet awakening of the forest, I felt welcomed. The leaves whispered my name. The pine needles cushioned my shoulders. The earth held me without judgment. I slept at night with a sense of calm I hadn't known in years. No rehearsed smiles. No unspoken hierarchies. No separate tables marking me as less important. Just the heartbeat of nature and the knowledge that authenticity, once reclaimed, is never lost again. And in that truth, I found something far greater than any spotlight, the unwavering conviction that my story, my real story was still unfolding, one honest moment at a time. The cabin settled around me like an old friend greeting me at the door. Its wood walls bore the patina of countless seasons, knots darkened with age, grains raised by moisture and memory. I ran my hand along the rough plank beside the doorway, feeling the faint ridges under my fingertips. The air inside was cool and smelled of cedar and dust, with just a whisper of the pine resin that clung to the siding's exterior. The floorboards creaked beneath each step, announcing my arrival in a language of groans and sighs that felt comforting, as if the house itself exhaled relief that someone had finally come to stay a while. I set my duffel bag on the entry bench and looked around, taking in the modest layout. A single main room with a small kitchenette tucked into one corner, a narrow staircase leading to a lofted bedroom, and a fireplace with a stack of split logs piled on the hearth. Every surface felt real. Unpolished, honest, and forgiving of imperfections. Unpacking became a ritual. I unzipped my duffel and lifted out each item with intention. I folded my flannel shirts one by one, smoothing out the creases before placing them in the small dresser drawer, relishing the click of each garment sliding into place. Then I unrolled my jeans and laid them flat on the wooden chair by the window, the denim's crisp edges contrasting with the cabin's lived-in softness. Socks and underwear followed, stowed neatly into the dresser's lower cubby. I took out my leather journal, its cover scuffed where my thumb had repeatedly traced my name stamped in gold. I set it atop the small table, between a stack of yellowed postcards and a lone paperback of Hemingway I found on the shelf. The act of preparing my space felt like reclaiming territory, every item in its place, every possession a token of the life I carried with me. When I finished, I sat on the edge of the single sofa, the springs popping gently under my weight. I closed my eyes and listened. The wind whispering through the pine needles, a distant bird calling across the lake, the soft hum of insects stirring as days shifted toward dusk. For the first time in months, I wasn't playing a role. I wasn't smoothing over emotions or massaging egos, and I wasn't anticipating someone else's expectations. Here, there was no audience. Only the hush of the forest and the cabin's quiet acceptance. I rose and carried a chipped ceramic mug to the sink, filling it with water from the mountain spring faucet. The water gurgled down the drain, echoing like a rummaging brook. I stood at the window, gaze drifting over the still surface of the lake. It glowed silver in the late afternoon light, ripples dancing across its face like laughter. The air felt freshly washed, crisp against my skin, inviting a breath so full it felt as if my lungs might expand forever. On impulse, I retrieved the small cast-iron skillet from the stove and set it over a single burner. I cracked 2 eggs into it, their yolks bright as candles in the dim interior. As they sizzled, I thought about the choice I'd made, not just to escape the wedding, but to carve out a space where I could hear myself think again. I popped the eggs onto a faded enamel plate and carried them back to the sofa, sitting cross-legged as I ate. Each bite felt substantial, rich yolk and crisp-edged whites anchoring me to the moment, reminding me that nourishment could be simple and deeply satisfying. Full and content, I stepped back onto the porch, though it's slightly warm from the afternoon sun. I perched on the railing, legs dangling, and watched as dragonflies skimmed the water's edge. A breeze teased stray hairs across my forehead and carried the faint scent of wildflowers from the meadow beyond. The world here was patient. It offered no deadlines, no demands, no reminders of the past I'd fled. Instead, it presented a canvas of stillness. I closed my eyes, tilting my head back to let the sun's last rays caress my face. In that half-light, I felt something loosen inside me. The tension of borrowed obligations, the weight of polite acquiescence, the habit of always fitting myself into someone else's story. That weight slid from my shoulders into the wooden planks beneath me, where it dissolved into the grain. I opened my journal and wrote a single line. Here, I am enough. Night came gently, the sky slipping from lavender to deep indigo studded with stars. I built a fire in the hearth, the crackle and pop of burning wood filling the cabin with warmth. I poured a measure of whiskey into my chipped mug and sipped it by the firelight, its burn a familiar comfort. Shadows danced on the walls, each flicker like a quiet affirmation, you belong here. I lingered there until the embers glowed and the whiskey turned to warmth in my veins. Then, I stood and stretched, the stiffness in my back loosening as I moved. I gathered a blanket from a shelf and wrapped it around my shoulders like an old coat. I stepped back onto the porch and settled into the chair I'd built, simple and sturdy, its seat molded to the shape of my body. From that vantage, I watched the lake's dark mirror reflect the starlit sky. No music played. No voices drifted in. Only the pulse of my own breathing and the gentle chorus of the night. I stayed until the cold tipped the air with frost, until my blanket no longer kept the chill at bay. Then, I rose and slipped inside, the cabin's warmth greeting me like an embrace. I placed the mug on the mantel and climbed the narrow stairs to the lofted bedroom. Lying on the mattress, I felt the rhythm of my heartbeat steadying, settling into a quiet confidence. Tomorrow, I would explore the woods, maybe fish the lake's edge, or simply draw those postcards and send none of them. But tonight, I closed my eyes knowing that anger had been replaced by something more valuable, a quiet release, a sense of belonging to myself. And as I drifted off, I knew that no one here would ask me to disappear, that no one would ask me to shrink for their comfort. Here, I had room to expand. Here, I was home. That night, lying in the narrow loft bed, I let my mind wander back to the photos I'd forced myself to imagine. Braden's wedding in a grand hall, the tables arranged in perfect symmetry, the flowers bursting in white and blush, a chandelier casting soft light on smiling faces. My chair sat half-hidden, pushed back against the wall, its back turned to the center of the room, as though someone had swept me aside before the curtain rose. I pictured myself there, shoulders squared, hands in my lap, the edges of my vision filled with fleeting glances from distant relatives who barely recognized me. Even the photographer would crop me from the frame, focusing instead on the newlyweds lit from above, leaving me to fade into the shadows of their celebration. I closed my eyes and felt the weight of that missing chair settle in my chest. The absence of that one piece of furniture spoke volumes. It was a small thing, a single chair, yet it carried the message that I didn't belong. It told me that even my presence had to be managed, that my love for Braden was conditional and easily swept aside for the sake of civility and image. It stung more than any harsh word ever could. The missing chair was a hole carved out of my heart, a reminder that in their eyes I was replaceable. I sat up in the darkness and reached for the journal on the bedside table. I clicked on the brass lamp, its wick glowing amber, and opened to a blank page. My pen hovered for a moment. Then I wrote, "They created a space where I would not fit, then dared me to feel invisible." The words felt heavy, dripping onto the paper like wax. I closed the journal, lamp off, and returned to the mattress. Sleep came slowly, as though the weight of my thoughts pressed me into the mattress, refusing to let go until I had acknowledged the pain. Morning arrived pale and quiet, the first light slipping through the small window and illuminating the loft in gentle gray. I dressed in the same flannel shirt I'd worn yesterday, jeans comfortably worn, boots still dusted with sawdust. I descended the narrow stairs and stepped into the main room where the chair I'd built awaited me. Its simple form stood in stark contrast to the impeccably orchestrated seat I had been denied. There was no velvet cushion, no polished mahogany, only raw pine shaped by my hands. Its back was straight and dependable, its legs sturdy and unpretentious. I ran my hand over the smooth seat, feeling the subtle curves set by my sanding. I carried the chair out to the dock, placing it at the very edge facing the lake. The water lay still before me, a vast mirror untroubled by demands or expectations. I sat down, and for a moment, I let the lake reflect my shape, solid, unmovable. No one could sideline me here. No one could orchestrate my placement or remove me from view. I was as present and real as the morning mist rising from the water. As I breathed in the crisp air, I thought of Kellen and Suri and Ava, each of them seeing me without filters, without artifice. Their love was not a ceremony. It was a constant, unedited stream flowing straight to my heart. The silence around me carried wisdom. In its embrace, I realized that the missing chair at the wedding was not an invitation to wallow in hurt, but an imperative to build something better. They had crafted a narrative that excluded me. I would craft one that included myself. My chair, weathered by my labor and set against nature's slow rhythms, was my statement of defiance. It said, I am here. I matter. I will not disappear. Later in the day, I worked on another project. A small wooden table, low enough to hold my coffee mug and books when I sat on the dock. I measured and cut, sawdust drifting like golden snow around me. Each plank I joined whispered of reclamation, of space won back, of stories yet to be told. I thought about the note I had written but never sent. I won't be your prop, your backdrop, or your ghost. Now I added another line beneath it. I will build my own place in this world. As evening fell, I returned to the dock with the new table and set it beside the chair. I placed my journal on it and poured water from a thermos into my chipped mug. The letter I had drafted in my mind, one that began with apologies and ended in explanation, dissolved into the lake's reflection. There was no need for grand words or public declarations. The simple act of sitting in that chair, at that table, under the sky that held no judgments, was more than enough. A gentle breeze rippled the water and carried the scent of pine and evergreen inside me, reminding me of who I was before any ceremony defined me. I closed my eyes and listened to the world breathe around me, the rustle of leaves, the distant call of a loon, the steady pulse of my own heart. With every exhale, the sting of that missing chair faded, replaced by something stronger, self-respect rooted as deeply as the pines that crowned the hill behind me. I remained there until the first stars appeared, each one a pinpoint of possibility. I thought of tomorrow and the days that would follow when I would return home and find my place not in someone else's arrangement, but in the space I had carved for myself. The missing chair would no longer haunt me. It would remind me of my choice, to show up for myself above all else. When I finally rose and carried the chair back to the cabin, I felt whole. The absence that had threatened to hollow me out had been filled with something indestructible, an unwavering conviction that I belong wherever I choose to be. And as I lay down that night, the loft felt different, as though it too had shifted closer, embracing me not as a guest, but as home. The next morning, I woke to the faint drip of condensation gathering at the edge of the window pane and the sharp, clear air of dawn slipping through the crack in the door. I lay still for a moment, listening to the cabin breathe around me, the slow exhale of the wind through the pines, the gentle creak of the floorboards as the house settled into wakefulness. I didn't rush to move. I let the quiet fill me until I felt the weight of my own thoughts settling into place. Then I swung my legs over the side of the bed, the wood cold beneath my feet, and made my way downstairs. On the small table by the kitchenette, I noticed the stack of postcards I discovered the day before. They were yellowed at the edges, blank on one side and bearing faded images of far-off places on the other. The sun-drenched cliffs of Santorini, the bustling souks of Marrakesh, the serene canals of Venice. Someone had left them here long ago, an anonymous traveler who never mailed their memories home. I ran my thumb over the smooth paper and felt a pang of kinship. Like me, they had prepared messages they perhaps never sent, tied to shapes and places that mattered more in the journey than at the destination. I gathered the postcards in my hands, one by one, and traced the edges as though I were flipping through the chapters of a forgotten life. Then I retrieved my pen and, without overthinking it, began to write. The first was addressed to Braden. Wish you were here to see the way the morning light dances on the lake, how the mist lifts like a curtain to unveil a world that doesn't need perfection. Under the neatly penned words, I drew a simple sketch of the dock where I'd placed my chair. I didn't intend to send it. This was for me, a way to mark the moment I reclaimed my own narrative. The next postcard was for Ava. Your laughter would be the only sound more beautiful than the loons calling across the water. I hope you feel every bit of freedom in the wind. I wrote to Kellen. Fishing off the dock taught me patience in a way no meeting ever could. Imagine reeling in your first catch with me here. To Suri I wrote, I carried your cookies in my heart, sweet, unexpected, perfect. I wish I could share a fresh batch with you under these stars. Each message flowed from the well of moments that mattered. The mornings of light and the evenings of firelight, the peace that rose in my chest whenever I realized I was alive on my own terms. When I finished writing the postcards, I stacked them and set them on the windowsill where the dawn light could touch them. They would stay there, messages never meant for the postal service but meant all the same. I left them to dry and stepped outside, the chill of the morning air catching my breath as I crossed the porch. I headed toward the shed at the back of the cabin, where I'd found the toolbox on my first day. The door groaned as I pushed it open, revealing the scattered tools I'd barely touched since building the chair and table. A hammer lay next to a coil of nails. A handsaw leaned against a battered workbench. Clamps and chisels hung from a pegboard, each waiting for my attention. I paused, inhaling the familiar scent of wood shavings, oil, and a faint trace of old gasoline. In that instant, I felt the promise of creation stir through me again, an itch I hadn't scratched since I'd left home. I decided on my next project. The porch railing had a few loose boards, and the post at the corner wobbled ominously when I leaned on it. Fixing it would not only solidify the structure, but give me another way to shape this place into something I could truly call mine. I grabbed a length of pine that matched the existing boards, measuring it against the railing and marking each cut with deliberate care. As I sawed through the grain, the blade whispered against the wood, its rhythm in sync with the slap of my heartbeat. Each slice felt like an incision into the old self, freeing me piece by piece. Once the board was cut, I sanded the edges until they felt smooth under my fingertips, then carried it over to the porch. I pried out the shaky old board, dust falling in soft clouds around my feet, and slipped the new piece into place. The fit was snug, almost satisfying, and I tapped 3 nails through the board until it lay flush with the others. The corner post joined next, held steady by a fresh plank and reinforced with clamps until I drove 2 long screws deep into the beam. When I stepped back, the railing felt solid, not just as a safety feature, but as a boundary I had defined with my own labor. I stood on the porch and surveyed my work. The sun had climbed higher, setting the lake ablaze with gleaming ribbons of light. The repaired railing caught the glow, shining as though newly born. I ran my hand along its length, feeling the firmness beneath my palm. In that moment, I realized I was building more than wood structures. I was constructing a sanctuary. Each board, each nail, was a brick in the edifice of my self-respect, a testament to the choice I'd made to protect my peace. Inside, I returned to the table where the postcards lay, now dry and waiting. I picked them up again, feeling the slight warp of the paper from the morning's moisture. I shuffled them like a deck of cards and placed each one face down on the table. Then, one by one, I tucked them into the back of my journal, like pages of a diary that only I could read. Their messages became part of my story, reminders of the moments I'd captured in ink and will. Late that afternoon, I sat on the repaired porch, the railing solid beneath my elbow, and closed my eyes for a moment. The forest seemed to lean and to listen, the lake paused its gentle ripples, and the wind hushed its conversation as though the world itself awaited my next move. In that silence, I felt a profound gratitude for the postcards I never sent and the wood I'd shaped with my hands. Both were expressions of presence, a refusal to vanish into someone else's narrative. When I finally rose to stretch and collected my tools, I carried the sturdy hammer back to the shed with a sense of fulfillment. I left the clamps neatly hung, the saw returned to its peg, and the toolbox closed with a soft click. As I stepped back onto the porch and settled into the chair I had built, I understood that the work of healing and self-definition would continue long after the cabin grew quiet again. But for now, the railing was firm, the postcards were safe, and I was exactly where I needed to be, rooted, real, and unafraid to keep building. A few days into my escape, my phone buzzed on the table next to the chair I had built. It vibrated against the wood as though it were trying to claw its way back into my life, but I didn't reach for it right away. Instead, I closed my eyes and listened to the wind rustling the pines outside, the distant hum of insects, the steady lapping of the lake against the dock posts. For once, I let the quiet answer for me. After a moment, the buzzing stopped, replaced by a voicemail chime. I pressed play, without touching the screen to mute the vibration. Simone's voice, calm and polished, filled the cabin with words I no longer wanted to hear. "Malcolm, honey, I'm sorry about the RSVP. I hope you're not upset. Please call me when you get a chance. I just want to make sure you're okay." She said "we" as though Lyle and she spoke from the same heart, as though his approval was part of the currency that validated any contact between us. I closed my eyes again and let her apology wash over me like a too familiar ache. I could have pressed call back and watched her eyes soften with relief, could have forgiven the slight and pretended it never happened, but I didn't. I tapped delete, and the voicemail vanished into the digital ether, replaced by a smaller, nagging thought. Did I feel guilty? A flicker, quick as a moth's wing, but it passed before I could linger on it. Later that afternoon, another buzz. This time it was Braden's voicemail, left nearly simultaneously with Simone's, as though they had conspired to drown me in scripted sympathy. His voice was clipped, careful, lacking the warmth it once held. "Hey, Dad. I saw your RSVP. I hope I didn't hurt you. It's just, it got complicated. Lyle's parents want to meet you first. They don't know you, and Simone's worried it might make things awkward. I'm sorry if you're upset." He said, upset, as though that small word captured everything, my shock, my disappointment, the sensation of being erased. I glanced at the phone, thumb hovering over the save button, the screen illuminating my reflection in the darkwood. I replayed the message twice, each pass revealing the same hollow undercurrent, an assumption that my feelings were collateral damage in their mission to preserve appearances. He didn't ask if I missed him, didn't say he loved me. He just worried about me being upset. That word again, complicated, but it was not complicated. It was cruel. I pressed delete again, watching the message disappear without a trace. I tossed the phone back onto the table and leaned forward, elbows on my knees, watching the steam rise from the coffee mug I had poured hours before. The sweet, bitter aroma spiraled into the air as though mocking me. Hot, fragrant, ready. But I didn't drink it. It went cold in the mug, puddling at the bottom with the fingerprints of abandonment. I picked up the mug, peered inside, and saw my own face reflected in the dark liquid. A man finally untethered from obligation, even if it hurt to admit it. I set the mug down with gentle finality. I thought about returning the calls, the polite thing to do, the thing that proved I was decent. I pictured Simone's relieved smile, Braden's grateful half-hug, Lyle's measured nod of approval. I could have patched things up with a few soothing words, an agreement to attend another event later, a promise to be flexible. But then I remembered the way I had felt the day he called me just for the ceremony, the way Simone had once turned her back on me in public, the way Lyle had sneered when he thought I wasn't looking. I realized I owed them nothing but honesty. And the truth was that I felt better here, in this cabin, than I had in years at their manufactured celebrations. That evening, I heard another buzz. It was a text from Kellen. "Hey, Dad. I hope you're okay. I miss you. Call me when you want." The difference between that message and the others was like night and day. His words carried warmth, authenticity, an open invitation rather than a demand for forgiveness. I pressed call before I even thought. His voice crackled through the speaker, bright and familiar. "Hey, Dad. Everything good out there?" I leaned back, letting the chair cradle me, and smiled. "Better than good," I said. I needed this. I told him about the chair and the table and the postcards I'd written. He laughed, a genuine sound that made me close my eyes and breathe deep. "Wish I were there to help," he said. I told him he was there, in every plank I hammered and every word I wrote. After the call with Kellen, the cabin felt warmer, the walls less hollow. I made myself another coffee this time. I drank it. I stepped onto the porch and watched the sun sink behind the trees, the sky bleeding gold and rose before darkness. The phone sat inside, silent and dormant, as though it had given up on searching for me. I stood there until the first stars winked awake, each one a reminder that the night sky carried no obligation to include anyone it didn't choose. When I returned to the cabin, I found a voicemail light blinking again, a single message from Simone. I pressed the button to play it automatically, expecting the same tempered apology. Instead, all I heard was her breathing, soft and uneven, and then a click as the recording ended before any words were spoken. I sat in the chair, the wooden arms cool beneath my hands, and wondered what she had wanted to say that couldn't be put into words. I didn't save that message. I let it erase itself in the same way I had erased everything else they expected of me. I wrote in my journal that night. Some calls deserve an answer. Some don't. I choose which to return. And with that, I closed the book and turned the lamp off. The cabin held me in its gentle darkness, a sanctuary where echoes of other people's voices could not reach me unless I wanted them to. In that quiet, I heard only my own heartbeat and the promise it carried. I would never again be anyone's afterthought. On the fifth morning of my refuge, a soft knock came at the door just as the horizon began to blush with dawn's first light. Standing there, soaked in a hoodie and clutching a bag that smelled of home, freshly baked cookies and sunshine, was Suri, my youngest, her hair pulled back in a messy ponytail, eyes bright and determined. She didn't wait for an invitation. She crossed the threshold with the easy confidence of someone who belongs, set her bag down, and hugged me so tightly I thought I'd crack. Her arms were small but fierce, and for the first time in days, I felt everything else fall away. The sting of exclusion, the weight of polite apologies, the echo of my own silences. We sat at the edge of the dock, feet skimming the glassy water. She popped open 2 bottles of ginger beer, the fizz bubbling up like laughter that refused to be contained. She handed me one, and I felt the sweetness tingle on my tongue, the crackle of carbonation dancing across my senses. "I didn't think you'd come," I said quietly, watching her lean against the railing. "I wanted to see if you really meant you needed space." She rolled her eyes but smiled, and I remembered how she used to scowl at my attempts at humor when she was 5, how she always won. "Space is good," she said, twisting the cap off her bottle, "but only if it's not lonely space." I nodded, realizing that loneliness was never the goal. It was a byproduct of absence, not intention. Suri reached into her bag and pulled out a stack of photos, snapshots of our family before everything splintered. There was one of us at the county fair, faces painted, cotton candy on our shirts, another of us building a snowman in the backyard, cheeks red and noses dripping. One more of me teaching her to ride her bike, face shining with pride as she pedaled without training wheels for the first time. She handed me each photo, and I weighed them in my hand as though I could press them back into the past. The memories warmed me more than the sun rising behind the trees. "I missed you," she said, voice small behind her bravado. I closed my eyes against the sting of tears I refused to name. I reached out, brushed a loose strand of hair from her face, and told her I missed her too, more than I had words for. We sat there in companionable silence, the lake spreading before us like a promise that some things endure, no matter how deep the cuts. After a while, Suri hopped to her feet and pulled out a small, carved wooden box. Inside were paintbrushes, tubes of acrylic paint, and a stack of canvas panels. "Thought we could make something here," she said, setting up an impromptu studio on the dock. The idea of painting seemed absurd, me, covered in sawdust and weathered by woodwork, attempting art. Yet as she squeezed a dollop of cerulean onto a palette and offered me a brush, I realized how long it had been since I created purely for joy, unburdened by deadlines or expectations. Together we painted. She chose vibrant greens for the pines, soft lilacs for the sky, and bold blues for the lake's depths. I added a rough outline of our cabin, simple geometric shapes against her meticulous landscapes. She laughed when my lines wobbled, and I smiled when she added a tiny figure to represent me, standing on the porch, arms outstretched. Each stroke washed color into the morning air, blending our worlds back together on canvas. We worked until our hands were stained and the sun rode high overhead. Our paintings lay drying on the dock, dripping gently into the wood's grain. Suri fetched lemonade from my cooler, ice clinking against the glass, and we clinked our cups in a silent toast. "To us," she said, "to real seats at real tables." I raised my cup and gave her a nod, feeling a pride that soared higher than any applause I had ever sought. That afternoon, we gathered driftwood from the shoreline and built a fire pit beside the water's edge. As the flames crackled, Suri told me about school, her new math teacher who never believed anyone could hate fractions so much, and about her hopes to study marine biology so she could protect places like this lake. Her dreams were audacious and clear, unfiltered by fear of failure. I listened, amazed at the grace with which she carried her ambitions. Later, when the sky turned gold and the water mirrored every shade of twilight, Suri leaned her head on my shoulder. She said, "I don't care what Braden or Simone or Lyle thinks. You're my dad. That's enough." My throat tightened, and I kissed the top of her head. In that moment, I understood how precious this small, unguarded love was, rooted deep and capable of outlasting any staged ceremony. Night fell gently, and the stars emerged, pinpoints of light in a velvet sky. We nestled in blankets by the fire, its warmth a blanket around our shoulders. Suri pointed out constellations, rattled off stories of ancient heroes and hunters, and I realized that she was teaching me to look up again, to see beyond my own troubles to the vastness above. At last, she stifled a yawn and asked if she could sleep here on the sofa. I guided her to an old quilt, fluffing pillows for her head. She curled up, clutching her paintbrush like a talisman, and closed her eyes with the contentment of a child who knows she is loved. I sat in my handmade chair, sipping the last of the ginger beer, and watched her peaceful face glow in the firelight. I didn't hear my phone buzz that night. I didn't check for calls or messages. There were no RSVPs to consider, no seating charts to analyze, no curated images demanding my attention. There was only this, a cabin still as still could be, a lake full of moonlight, and my daughter, who came to remind me that no seating arrangement could ever eclipse the reality of our bond. In that quiet, I felt everything settle back into its rightful place. I was not an afterthought. I was not a placeholder. I was a father, woken anew by the cracks in the world that let in love's unfiltered light. And that was more than enough. I never looked at the photos, but I heard about them in pieces, snatches of conversation that drifted out of the digital ether like confetti in the wind. Kellen sent a text. Your seat was empty. It didn't look right. Suri posted a short video of the ceremony on her private feed, zooming in on the back row where, if you squinted, you could just make out an empty chair. Ava whispered to me over the phone that Aunt Marjorie gave Lyle's parents the best table, front and center, and that Braden had motioned her to sit beside his new mother as though they shared a secret. Simone's perfect dress made the rounds, too. Crystal beading, lace overlay, a cascade of chiffon that must have cost a small fortune. Everywhere I turned, their images replayed like echoes in a gallery of absence, reminding me that I had become my own artifact, relic of a life they no longer wanted in the frame. But I didn't scroll through any of it. I didn't click on the links or swipe through the thumbnails. I refused to see my erasure. Instead, I did what I'd come here to do. I sat in the chair I had built, on the dock I'd repaired, with the new table I had crafted beside me, and I watched the lake catch the morning light. Its surface was a mirror, smooth and unbroken, offering me a reflection that no staged photograph could capture. My shoulders were squared, not stiff with tension, but relaxed in self-possession. I allowed the sun to paint stripes of warmth across my face, and for the first time in days, I felt the ease of being exactly where I belonged. Later, when the air warmed enough to chase away the dawn's chill, I moved to the fire pit we had built with Suri, circling the stones into a perfect ring. I stacked wood carefully, each log a reminder of the effort I had poured into this place. I struck a match, and the flames rose in a silent roar, crackling like applause. Smoke curled upward, twisting against the sky before dissipating into nothing. I watched it and felt my mind clear, the residual sting of exclusion evaporating in the blaze. I thought about sending a gift, maybe a simple wooden frame for that photo of my empty seat, or a small print of one of our painted canvases, something to remind them I existed beyond digital shadows. But I realized that any offering I sent would be another invitation to the performance, another attempt to correct their narrative instead of living my own. So I let the thought drift away like smoke on the breeze. By midday, the cabin's windows glowed with sun, the walls absorbing heat that radiated through the wood. I brewed coffee in the old percolator, savoring the rich aroma that seeped into every corner of the room. I carried a steaming mug to my workspace, where the postcards lay pressed between the pages of my journal. I thumbed through them, each message a footprint I had left behind in ink and intention. One postcard read, "I hope the ceremony was beautiful, but I won't be your prop or your ghost." Another said, "My place is here, where I choose to be, not where I'm told to sit." I had written them in moments of quiet clarity, and now they felt like declarations carved into stone. I set the journal aside and planned my next project. A rowboat stored at the far end of the dock, its hull patched with cracked fiberglass and peeling paint. The idea of rowing across the lake, unhurried and unaided, appealed to me like a promise of freedom. I bundled tools, sandpaper, resin, brushes, and carried them down the dock, the boards creaking in greeting. I examined the boat's flaws, a gash along the side, a split in one of the rafters, mildew creeping beneath the gunnel. I sanded until the wood grain shone, then applied fresh resin to seal the cracks. Each brushstroke sealed more than just fiberglass. It sealed in lessons of resilience and self-reliance. As I worked, I hummed a tune that had nothing to do with weddings or seating plans, but everything to do with the calm steadiness I felt inside. The rhythm matched the slap of water against the dock posts, the whisper of wind through the reeds, the beat of my heart steady and true. Other than the occasional distant call of a loon, the day held no interruptions. No voicemails to erase, no polite inquiries to manage. Just the steady progress of my repairs and the assurance that, for once, every action was in service of my own peace. By mid-afternoon, the boat was seaworthy. I tested it by easing in, its hull giving a gentle creak under my weight. I pushed off from the dock and drifted onto the lake, oars dipping silently. I rowed without destination, allowing the boat to glide across the water's glassy surface. The wake I left behind was small but certain, a trace that I had been here, unafraid to move. The horizon spread wide, no walls or ceilings to contain me, only the infinite sky above and the lake below. When I reached the far shore, I tied the boat to a stout tree root and climbed onto the rocky bank. The stones were cool beneath my boots, mottled with lichen and the fingerprints of past visitors. I walked a narrow path into the woods, sunlight filtering through leaves in shifting patterns. I carried a small saw in my pocket, and when I found a fallen branch of the right size, I cut it free to fashion a walking stick. The wood was smooth but firm, and each step I took deeper into the forest affirmed my choice to journey on my own terms. Hours passed as I wandered, the forest offering glimpses of wildflowers, of chipmunks darting through the underbrush, of birds flitting along sun-dappled paths. I paused at a clearing where the sun broke through the canopy in golden shafts, then sat on a mossy rock and closed my eyes. The scent of earth and pine filled me, grounding me in a reality beyond ceremonies and polite exclusions. My breathing synchronized with the pulse of the woods, each inhale a gift, each exhale a release. When I returned to the cabin, the first lantern was lit, casting a warm glow against the darkening sky. I hung my walking stick by the door and shook out my worn shirt, the day's labors etched into its fibers. I sat at the table with the postcards open, flipping through the messages one last time before tucking them back into my journal. I wrote a new line at the end of that entry. Some places don't need permission to exist. Neither do I. As night fell, I carried one lantern to the dock and set it at the end where the chair stood, a beacon of presence against the starlit water. I sat there, sipping tea from a thermos, and watched my reflection ripple in the gentle waves. No strangers bustled around me. No polite applause arose. Instead, there was only the vast expanse of lake and sky, acknowledging my existence not because I had earned a seat, but simply because I had chosen to arrive. In that gentle glow, I felt whole, not an artifact in someone else's gallery, but the living architect of my own peace. Back home, the garage felt different. More like a blank page than a storage closet full of abandoned dreams. I pushed aside dusty boxes and old paint cans until I cleared a space big enough for my workbench. The concrete floor was cold beneath my boots, but I didn't mind. I plugged in a single overhead light, the bulb flickering before steadying into a harsh glow that left no corner unseen. My tools waited in the neat rows I'd established months ago. Hammers with worn handles, saws with keen teeth, clamps and chisels gleaming with promise. Behind them, the chair I'd built stood in quiet witness, its pine finish catching the yellow light, speaking of nights by the lake and mornings of clarity. I ran my hand along its backrest, recalling every smooth stroke of the sandpaper and every ringing echo of the hammer's strike. I gathered materials for my next project. A sturdy oak plank salvaged from an old barn door, its grain deep and knotted, and a set of ledger boards recovered from the cabin's loft that I'd brought home for future use. I measured and marked the oak with a carpenter's pencil, envisioning the table I would build, this one not for solitude but for gathering, a space where I could choose who to invite without feeling the weight of obligation. I saw in my mind's eye a long, low surface strong enough to hold plates and glasses, books and tools, laughter and confession. It would be more than wood. It would be a symbol of everything I had learned about presence and absence, authenticity and self-respect. I cut the oak plank with a circular saw, the blade whirring like a distant train, and guided the wood along the line until the scent of fresh-cut timber filled the room. I sanded the edges with firm, even strokes, the coarse grit smoothing into fine, silken lines under my palm. As I worked, memories drifted in. Simone's sharp goodbye as she hauled boxes out the front door, Braden's polite nod at Christmas when I offered a gift he refused to open, Lal's satisfied grin when he claimed the space I'd once filled. None of that mattered now. With each swipe of the sandpaper, I was carving away their definitions of me and shaping something that belonged only to my hands, my heart, my mind. I assembled the legs next, selecting sturdy oak beams left over from the barn's frame. I tapered their tops to fit into mortises I had chiseled into the underside of the tabletop. The chiseling demanded patience, a steady hand, a clear eye, a willingness to let each pairing carve out the pieces that didn't belong. When the last mortise was clean, I fitted the tabletop onto its legs, and the pieces clicked together with satisfying precision. I tapped them with a mallet to seat them fully, then reinforced each joint with wooden dowels that would swell with finish and hold the parts together through seasons of use. Assembling the table felt like composing a letter to myself. Every cut, every joint, every hammered dowel was a word in a manifesto of self-determination. I thought of Ava's shy smile when I told her I'd be building something special at home, of Kellen's bright curiosity about my woodworking, of Suri's insistence on painting a mural on the tabletop once the stain dried. Their voices echoed in my memory, guiding my hands as surely as any blueprint. I mixed the stain with careful attention, oil-based, rich walnut, brushing it onto the oak until the grain glowed with a warm depth. The wood drank it in like a parched traveler drawing water from a well. As the stain settled into every groove, I wiped away the excess with a rag, revealing patterns that seemed to dance under the light. I applied a second coat for added richness, then sealed it with 3 layers of clear polyurethane, each one buffed smooth so that the surface would reflect candlelight and laughter alike. When the finish cured, I carried the table outside and set it in the center of the garage, sunlight streaming through the open door. It stood proud and confident, its scars and knots unapologetic, a tribute to history and resilience. I ran a hand along its edge, feeling the faint give of the finish beneath my fingertip, and let out a breath I hadn't realized I'd been holding.